How's it going, everyone? This is James once again from James Films. It's been just a week since my last video, hoping to be a bit more regular here on YouTube, so please subscribe so you're notified when these new videos come out. Today I'm trying something a little bit different here, and I want you to let me know if you like this kind of concept of videos to kind of, mesh in between my longer tutorials, step-by-step tutorials. Every week I'm hoping to kind of break down one or two of the pieces that I worked on in my free time during that week. So for this week I have two pieces for you that I created kind of using a couple different Kitbash3D assets here. I wanted to challenge myself to create a scene, integrating these elements with a lot of my own style to these things. And I just kind of wanted to walk you through the process of creating something like this, the inspiration behind the scene creation, the lighting design, as well as some notes about specific other assets that I used, and I guess how you can leverage some of those for your scenes as well. But before I get into that, I wanted to add a quick update to a video I released last week about the True Sky add-on. I was back and forth with the creator and I heard some really cool updates to their add-on. There's one thing I mentioned would be really nice to have, and it actually already is included in this add-on. I had not yet really discovered this, but it was kind of the evaporation effect of clouds, kind of having the clouds, change shape, change size as they kind of come in and out. This already does exist. As you can see here, there's an example over here. There's like a little demo of how you cut that together. You can do some keyframing to kind of, change that evaporative effect of the clouds. So super, super cool. Another update, which I think is okay to share here as well too, but they're working on kind of like a day-night cycle, which should be really cool too if you're trying to do time lapses, throughout a 24-hour cycle. Really, really cool designs as well. So a lot of cool updates, and as well as updates to that. I think I'd mentioned this in the last tutorial too, but there's currently a discount using the code TrailySky for 15% off the True Sky add-on. You can get that in the description. Check that out. Really fun add-on to play around with, and I'm definitely using a lot more in my scenes going forward. So for starters here, I wanted to walk through scene number 1 of 2, and this is kind of like a castle pool scene. I can hit on rendered mode here to show you what it looks like in my viewport, at least here on the right. And so this was a fun one to put together. I used, like I said, Kitbash3D assets from their Dark Fantasy set to kind of compose the scene, and there's a couple different elements you can see I've got going on here. I really like these kind of natural archways, kind of reminiscent of cathedrals, or really, really cool details that you have here at the top of each of these. And then I used a bunch of really awesome assets from one of my buddy B Productions, his Vegetation set. There's a lot of really great ones in here, and I found myself kind of using this a lot more for kind of details, like small plant and garden details in my scenes, like lily pads and stuff. There's a really great set of lily pads that I use quite a bit. For all of the kind of hanging plants that you see here in the viewport, it's a little bit easier to see here than through kind of the denoised on the right. So if you look around here, all these little bushes and then these climbers and things here are all included in the shrubs. So there's like a lot of these really cool low shrub plants that I use quite a bit in these different types of scenes. And then also in the garden plants, I found myself using these Spirea bushes quite a bit, which I used to have a Spirea bush outside my house growing up. So for me, it's kind of like a nostalgic effect to have these in my scenes. I really love, the little pop of color it gives. And so if you're looking in the render here, you see this little pop of purplish pink kind of framing throughout here. I really like that effect to kind of draw your eye into the scene. And then these hanging plants here are in the Climber tab. There's a couple other ones as well that I've used a bit too, these vines. But I like to use these large vine plant, so you can kind of see the scale with regards to what a person would be like standing next to it. So there are these two varieties, and that's really all you need for a lot of these. I think people don't think, just using one specific asset, you can create a whole scene and make it look different. But what I do is I'll take, those two different variations and then rescale them differently. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of sculpting. You can go into sculpt mode. So if I was to select one of these, you can tab into edit mode on it. Oops, this is one that I've take a second to load up here. But you can tab into edit mode and use proportional editing and kind of move things around a little bit to kind of, follow the curvature of whatever you're using. So you can see here, it's running a little bit slow since it's also rendering on the side here. But if I was to go into here and then I can click on this proportional edit mode, I could select specific points and then kind of drag around my structure to frame out the arches a bit better. So this is kind of how I fill out a lot of the scene elements, like these small elements, using a lot of the vegetation things throughout the scene there. So let's just talk a bit about the composition of the scene before we go a little bit further here into the lighting design. So if I just kick back into viewport mode here for a second, what I've done here is, and let me just turn on my camera guys, and this is something I recommend you do when you're creating a scene, is to go over to your camera, down to the camera properties tab, and then turn on the composition guides for rule of thirds and center. And so you can kind of see, it's a little bit hard to see through some of the objects and stuff here, but when I was first starting to block out the scene before adding in all the plants and stuff, let me actually just turn off these plants for now, so you can actually see a little bit better what the composition is like. So I wanted to frame this out so that this pool in the front kind of brings your eyes into the scene, and if I turn off the water, you can see there's a little staircase in the pool too that leads up to this central arch structure. So this is one of the Kitbash3D assets, and there's a couple of them I've kind of duplicated a couple times and to frame out the scene. So you've got some on the left here, you know, as kind of like a secondary focal element. But this main one, it's kind of like almost like a double arch too. So you see there's a couple of these kind of leading out towards the distance in the background. And I really liked kind of compositionally how that looked, putting that together. So I designed that out, and then I filled in the rest using a couple other different Kitbash assets to, you know, frame out the building size of this, and, you know, have these kind of tall castle elements kind of leading up into the sky, leading up into the beyond. I thought that would look really neat for this scene too. And so then if I click back into rendered mode, typically I use HDRIs, and I've used quite a few of HDRIs in my different tutorials. Last week I was talking about the True Sky add-on. For this one, I went back to one of my classic favorites, which I use quite a bit for my renders, which is the physical starlight and atmosphere. And I use this one just to have some flexibility for creation of the crazy atmospheric fall-off effects in the background. It also runs a bit faster, and I knew I was going to be adding a lot of different elements, kind of high poly geometry and stuff to this too, so I just wanted it running a little bit quicker. This is one you can pick up in the description of this video too. A really great add-on. I use this one, like I said, quite a bit for things. In addition now to the True Sky, it's just another one from my portfolio. And you can see I made quite a few changes here to mainly the density. So in the background, this is actually kind of where a lot of my scenes come together, is with the lighting. I'll just kind of turn on something like physical starlight and atmosphere, or add an HDRI or a sun lamp, and just kind of see naturally what the light starts to frame in my scenes. And so for this one, I wanted this central arch, and I noticed that I was getting this like really cool light bleed kind of down the center of my frame. And so once again, with the composition guides all set up, I was starting to kind of eye this up, and I really liked kind of the framing that you had from this sun lamp here in the scene. You can see kind of in the center, there's like a really nice kind of golden glow here. And I really wanted to enhance that and kind of have that dominate the scene. So it really guides your eye into that archway in the middle. And you'll see once I get into the post-processing for this image exactly how that came together in post in Photoshop. But that was the idea there, was to kind of frame that out that way. And you can see for a lot of my scenes, I like to keep the lighting design pretty simple. Usually I'll just use an HDRI with a sun lamp to kind of enhance the effect. For this one, I added in addition to having the physical starlight atmosphere, I added an additional sun. And if I kind of turn this on and off, you'll see that's just enhancing somewhat. I didn't really like how strong that beam was across the pool, so I wanted to add a second lamp, the sun lamp here, just to kind of heighten that effect for me a little bit, to bring through, especially when I started adding in volumetric. So if I add in, let me just turn off my gas lamps here for a second. So this is the base lighting. And you'll notice one thing too, I'm able to turn on and off collections. This is kind of the power of staying organized in Blender. I try to do this as much as possible. Sometimes scenes get a bit out of control, but if you can add things to collection, that definitely helps you when you're just trying to isolate certain things. So, you know, I'm able to just isolate all the climber plants in my scene. I'm able to isolate just the gas lamps in my scene, and then just with a click, just turn them on and off. It's easier than just going through, you know, each individual object, turning them off. If you can just mute the collection. You can even do this when you're rendering too. So if I didn't want to render, you know, the climbers in my scene, I can just click that off, hit render, and they won't exist. So this, having that sun lamp here was, you know, more important when I started adding in the volumetrics. And if I click on this volumetric, it's just a big cube, and I've talked about adding volumetrics to your scenes before. You can see it's just this large cube that just encompasses my scene. And if I go over to the shader editor, you see I'm using the principal volume, and I went with a little bit higher density than I usually would. Usually I'm around like 0.003, something very, very subtle, and then I'll use a mist pass over my compositor. For this one, I didn't feel like that was necessary because I was having this really beautiful fall off already with the volumetrics in my scene. So I added that principal volume in, and you can see it's kind of dark, the scene, right? So I'm losing all of those details from the building. I mean, this is a cool effect if I wanted to go for this really dramatic, moody scene, but usually for my scenes, I don't want them to be that dark and kind of that ominous looking. I want it to be inviting. I want it to be cozy. I want it to be a place that you could, you know, think about relaxing. And it's more of like a vacation kind of aesthetic that I was trying to go for. So I was losing a lot of that detail. And kind of going with the castle theme here and thinking about the kind of older architecture, I thought about gas lamps, and I used this gas lamp asset from Blender Kit and then kind of brought it to life with some additional point lighting here. So you can see I've added in, you know, these different gas lamps. If I zoom in on this over here, you can see it's just a little 3D object, you know, of this gas lamp that just adds in some subtle details to those wall elements. And so that worked pretty well. And then in addition to that, I added in some just kind of general overall lighting, because this is doing a really good job lighting up just the area around it, but I wanted a little bit more splash of lighting to my scene. So if I click on this, you can see that really brings the scene to life. This additional couple point lights. And like I said, I try to keep my lighting as simple as possible, but in some cases, especially for darker scenes where you need to splash light in certain places if you're losing elements, you need to kind of go a little bit more piecewise to add in some lighting to places where you're losing a lot of the detail. So I just have a couple of point lights scattered around the scene, and one important thing to note about these point lights is if I go over to the Object Properties tab here and scroll down, actually sorry, for the lighting properties, is it lighting properties or object properties? Yeah, object properties. So I turned off two things here, which is an important thing to note. So if I turn back on my water, and if I click on this light, for example, this one's centered here, and if I turn back on this glossy, you'll see an issue here. So by default, glossy and volume scatter are both enabled when you add in a point lamp. And since I have this glossy and the pool is reflecting a lot of light, you just see the point lamp, you know, reflected off the pool, which I don't want. You know, I don't want this weird reflection, because if you're looking at this render, you're like, well, where is that light? You know, it looks like there's like a sphere or some kind of dome light, you know, sitting right in our pool or right above our pool. So I just turn off that glossy just so that it's not reflecting. And then if I turn on this volume scatter, you can see sometimes this works, but you know, it also adds a lot of fireflies, a lot of noise to your scene too, just because you know, you're having a lot more light bounces. So I didn't want this light to contribute to the volume scatter. I was fine with just having the sun lamp and the HDRI contributing to that as well. So I just turned off for all of them, all these point lights, the volume scatter, just to reduce the noise a bit. I didn't really need that extra atmosphere from it. I think it was already kind of coming through pretty well. So that is what I did there. And then I had, like I said, all the other objects added in. If I turn back on the bush coverage, if I turn back on my climbers and the Terrascape add-on, or Terrascape assets rather, for those palm trees, just for like a little bit of a tropical flair. You know, I always love these tropical beach scenes. Just had that tropical flair in here, and you'll see the scene, it's pretty much coming together. So this is the composition. It was a lot of fun kind of putting that together. I did experiment with some water lilies too. I can kind of turn this back on. You can see, though I felt like it kind of junked up just a slight bit. You know, maybe you enjoy this. Let me know in the comments if you like it with the water lilies. I thought it was taking away somewhat from the kind of just calm stillness of the pool. And at this point, I was ready to render it out. So I went with higher samples than I probably needed, 800 samples. Denoising enabled for this one, optics. Didn't do anything in the compositor here in Blender, but sometimes I would, you know, add in that mist pass, kind of combine that into my scene in Blender, maybe add a little bit of glare. But this one, like I said, was already very foggy, very, very nice looking. So if I open it up in Photoshop, you can see this is where I really just kind of took it to the next level. And I can kind of walk you through all the different effects here to get to this point. So let me just kind of turn off everything here for now and just go back to the raw image out of Blender. So this is what came directly from Blender. And the first thing you'll notice is it's quite dark. It's a quite, you know, dark scene here. So what I usually do is add in a levels adjustment first here. And let me just turn off some of these other adjustments here and kind of walk through the reasoning for each of them. So for the levels, I just kind of crunch things a little bit here to bring back some of the midtones. Some of the highlights I kind of will pull in a bit so that it's a little bit more, you know, contrasty, and you get like a really nice, beautiful kind of glow to the image. So that's that. And then I also pull up the shadows just a little bit too, just because initially it's kind of washed out. If I just kind of pull that up a little bit, kind of darkens it up just a little bit more. Added in just a little bit of brightness to it, and then some vibrance as well. This is, again, very subtle. You know, -6 on the vibrance. I usually pull the vibrance down just a little bit and then push the saturation. With a lot of my edits, and I kind of strongly encourage you to follow this approach as well, as to not overdo things. This one felt a little bit more stylized as a piece in general, so maybe it's okay to kind of go a little bit more extreme with this, but generally, I like to do a very subtle adjustment with these final things. I like to be as close as possible to the final render when I put out a blender. And then a lot of these changes, if I go to this brightness, it's just, you know, dropping the contrast by -5. It's, you know, very subtle little changes here and there to kind of, you know, change the scene. I added a color lookup with just some crisp warmth to it as well. Just added a curves adjustment, very subtle S-curve here, just to kind of add a little bit more contrast to my scene. Photo filter to kind of brighten the warmth up a little bit. Again, very subtle, just a 5% photo filter. And then just did a little bit of color balancing because I was noticing it was getting a little bit too kind of sickly looking yellowish greenish. So I just brought back in some of the purples and blues into the shadows and highlights as well, just to kind of make that a bit better. So if I turn off the adjustment layers on and off, you can see the effect that's having on my scene. And then I added in just a little bit of mist overlay, and then I have this kind of lens flare that I'll sometimes add in. Again, I like to do a lot of the volumetrics in Blender, and a lot of the extra stuff that you see here is just kind of taking it a step further just to add in just that extra kind of glow to it. So I added in like a little bit of mist and then these light beams too. So kind of enhancing the volumetrics, the directionality of it. I wasn't getting as strong volumetrics up at the top here. I was getting some really cool kind of mist, but I wanted a little bit of the kind of scattered light rays effect too, kind of drawing your eye into this archway. So that was, again, my central focal element was this archway. So I kind of had the light guiding you into there. So there's one on the top, and if I just kind of up the opacity on this, you can see what it is. It's these light rays here. And again, very subtle. I did a linear dodge and then just pulled this way down to, you know, like 14%, and same deal for the bottom one too. So same exact thing, just flipped vertically. And so this kind of just draws your eye into where the sun element is in the middle. I did a little bit of dodging and burning just to kind of bring up some of the contrast in the lights. So that's what this is, this layer here. And then just did a little bit of filtering with something I've talked about before, the Nick collection. I don't think this is available anymore. It's like an obsolete thing. You can maybe find it somewhere, but I've just had this in my Photoshop for a number of years now, back to when I was actually still editing photos that I would take. I would use this usually as kind of like a final step. So that just kind of adds like, you know, a little bit of vignetting, a little bit of glow here and there. And this is the final image. So a lot of fun to get to this one for the first render. Again, using a lot of those Kitbash3D assets to kind of put the different elements together to frame the scene out, and then just a little bit of my, you know, classic environmental design here. So had a lot of fun with this first one. So let's head on to render number 2. All right, and now we are on to render number 2. This was kind of like a castle garden inspired render. One of my favorite places to go visit, and it's been a number of years since I've been able to go out there with the pandemic and everything, but the Tuileries Gardens in France and the Jardin du Luxembourg are beautiful, really cool kind of mix of this kind of really old historic architecture with a lot of bright colors, like a lot of bright flowers and bushes and things like that. One of them even has like a playground in it as well. So really, really cool places, and I kind of took that inspiration, again, challenging myself with some Kitbash3D assets to create kind of like a botanical garden inspired place. For this one, for the flowers that you see here, I can start talking about the design here. Typically, I'd like to use the Scatter add-on, which is a lot of fun, Scatter 5. If you've yet to check this out, I have a tutorial from a couple months ago, I think it's been at this point, walking through this new add-on, the updates to it. It's been, you know, in the works for a number of years. Huge update recently, really, really fun to work with, and that also integrates very, very well with just generally other assets that I have as well. So I've got other flowers and bushes and trees and stuff that you can really quickly scatter along your scenes. But for this one, I wanted to try something different. My friends over at Botaniq just came up with, or Polygoniq is their, I guess, parent company. Botaniq is their plant asset library. They just released a whole bunch of new flower assets recently. And I wanted to, you know, experiment a bit with those, see how they work with my scenes, you know, see what kind of color effects you can get with them. And then also they have a kind of built-in scattering functionality too. So I wanted to test that out for my scene and just kind of see how it compares or contrasts with the Scatter 5 add-on. So what's really cool is I can just turn both of these off here in the viewport. So you can see I have a plane here that is my scatter object beneath, and then I can scatter some grass initially on top of it, and then scatter all these flowers. And it's super quick to do this. You just scroll down if you're all the way up here at the top. And what's nice about their latest edition too is all of their different assets or add-ons are all combined together in one place. So I just click on the Polygoniq tab, and you've got your Aquatiq, which has been cool to play around with as well. You've got some modular fountains and stuff. I've added these to a couple scenes. They're animated as well, which is really fun. So you have that one, and then you also have Traffiq, which is updated as of recent with a couple different more USA-centric things. It seems like there's like a kind of like a July 4th update that they had with some more American cars or inspired things is what they described. So they've got like a yellow school bus and stuff like that. So you can find that in their latest asset. I'll link it in the description as well if you want to check that out. But today I'm just going to be talking about Botaniq, which is the one I use for this. And so in the scatter object thing down here, what you do is just click on Scatter Assets, and it brings up this drop-down menu here, and you've got a bunch of different options to select from. So now I'm clicked on this top plane, which is where I'm going to be scattering things. And then if I click on this flowers, you can see a thumbnail preview of the different scatter assets that you can put on here. And these are all a lot of their newest assets that they've just recently added in. A bunch of these really cool flowers and stuff. I chose the Flower Bed Rustic B, I believe, for this one is the one I used. Though for a couple other renders I worked on this week, I used their Dahlia, which was really fun, and their Sunflower Field, which was pretty good too. I think I like still the sunflowers a bit better from Scatter's assets, but these ones look really cool too. And so you just scattered in there, and then you've got a variety of different particle settings, similar to what you'd see over in the particle menu tab here. They're just over in this area here. And so for this one, I added in a density map using some weight painting. And so I was able to go in and kind of paint out like a little pathway here for your kind of eye to guide you naturally into the frame. So if you're looking at the render view here, I wanted you to kind of walk naturally into, once again, my focal element is an arch for this one. I don't know what it is about arches, but I find them to be very aesthetically pleasing, very relaxing elements. Maybe a shout out to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, especially since this was very Parisian inspired with the street lamps and everything. So that is the kind of guiding line for this scene compositionally. And if I go back out of rendered mode here, you can kind of get a clear idea of my framing. And I turn on the camera guides. If I go over to my camera here, I didn't do as good a job organizing this one. This was my first scene that I put together with the Kitbash assets, so I kind of just went crazy with stuff and just threw everything together. But once again, I framed stuff out here using a bunch of different elements. You can see all the different Kitbash elements I used for this one. I was kind of playing around with just generally framing stuff around the sides here, and I didn't really know what I wanted to have as my focal element. And then I found in the Kitbash assets this really cool kind of bridge arch that I did a little bit of work to center up here in my frame. And so you can see that is commanding the center of our frame. And then I kind of had everything else leading towards it. So we've got some really cool elements here, this kind of stairway, taking you as a secondary focal element on a ride off to the left. And then in the distance, there's some other castle elements that you can kind of faintly see, and especially when I turn on the rendered mode, they kind of fade off in the distance, but give this really cool effect of, a never-ending scene just kind of fading off. You can see they're very subtle. You can see a lot more in the viewport, but here they're almost kind of, black, dark in the distance. And once again, for the lighting here, I used one of my favorite add-ons here that I've used just so much is the physical Starlight atmosphere. And I pretty much just got rid of the sky. So I actually, in this one, made it transparent. I kind of liked how it looked initially, but I wanted a little bit more flexibility in post, doing a little bit of design for the sky. Like I said, I'd like to do as much stuff in Blender as possible. For the last render, the sky was straight out of Blender. For this one, I wanted to kind of, once again, have a bit more flexibility. So I just turned that off in the background here. And then if I just kind of turn off all these point lights here, you can see what the light looks like raw. Once again, I didn't do as good a job, kind of adding everything in here. But this is very dark. So you can see just how dark this is. And if I turn off also the volume, the volumetrics here, this is our volume, you can see just how dark the scene looks. So what that physical Starlight atmosphere add-on is adding is just a very subtle kind of splash. If I zoom out here, you can see It has just a faint bit of color to the scene. It's really very dark though, so the main lighting for this scene is coming from these point lights. And I had a lot of fun kind of placing these, primarily using the street lamps. So each one of these street lamps has some points, but the main point light is this one that's kind of in the middle of the arch that you can see right here. That is lighting the majority of my scene, this light. And I really liked how I was bringing out a lot of the detail in this archway. So you can see kind of those cool stone elements framing up very nicely. And then I've got 2 other point lights. This one's in the foreground, just kind of lighting a little bit of these flowers. I really wanted to bring out that kind of shininess, the sheen that you have on the flowers. So that light is working to do that one. And then there's an additional point light up at the top of this bridge, just to highlight some of the detail of this little guardrail that you see. And then some of the buildings on the side, I just wanted that one. And this one is turned down very low, so I'm only at 500 watts here. This one is 2000, so it's the brightest of them all, front and center. And then the rest of these point lights are ones that are composing these lamps here. And these lamps were pulled from the Blender Kit asset library as well. Typically I'd model these myself. This, again, I just wanted to kind of work as quickly as possible to create a scene and just challenge myself to do that. So I've added all that in there. I originally had a sun lamp. I actually didn't need this. I turned this off, so I was just using the Starlight sun and then a lot of these point lights. And I really like the kind of warmth that you're getting here, but I'm losing a lot of kind of the mystery. For this one, it is very cozy, but I wanted to make it slightly kind of, you know, foggy, as if it's like a late summer night, you know, very humid. It's been very humid where I've been recently. I was out last night for a run. It was like 90 degrees still at like 9 p.m. Really hot still. So I kind of wanted to channel that, you know, mistiness, that humidity for this, really make it feel like a nice warm summer night, maybe a little bit too warm of a summer night. So that's where this volume comes into place. So if I just add this back in, you can see that really beautiful fog that we get, particularly around the lamp elements. So if you look at these, you know, lights here, if I just kind of toggle this on and off, here it is without. We're kind of losing a lot of the detail up top here. So this is quite dark. So when we're adding back in that volumetric, it really brings that back out, kind of adds a little bit of washed out feel to it, and brings back in some of the details of those bricks. Once again, for the rest of the kind of interstitial elements that you see in the scene, like all the bushes and climbers and stuff, I pulled once again from the Vegetation asset library from my friends over at B Production. I had a lot of fun kind of putting this together and added in a bunch of different plants and stuff to the scene. A lot of these different climbers and things, just to frame out the scene and add a little bit more of that natural element to the building itself. So you can see they're kind of framing those climbers that I used before, kind of framing the archway, not going up all the way, just framing it enough to kind of give the effect of, you know, ivy or whatnot kind of growing up the different buildings here. So that's what that is there. And then same deal, I was ready to render this one out pretty quickly with that transparent background. Take things over into Photoshop. I just did 800 samples once again with optics denoising. And now if I open up into Photoshop, you can see a very different scene almost here because of the color grading. This one I spent a lot more time kind of going through post-production. You can see here it is raw again. If I go back into Photoshop, you can see just how much work was put into this. So if I turn everything off here, let me just turn everything off to begin with. So this is the raw render out of Blender. So I was noticing it was like a little bit too yellow, and so the first thing I wanted to do is actually add in the sky just to have an idea of what the sky was going to look like. So if I go to the stars background and turn this back on, I added in this midnight moon image that I got from Unsplash, and you can see the color clashes quite a bit with, you know, the foreground. Obviously, there's really no strong blue element. Everything's very golden, kind of green in our foreground. So this is looking really off. So I just added in an adjustment layer of a hue, saturation, brightness, contrast, and just brought the saturation way down, you know, almost to black and white. So if I click on here, you can see I brought it down by 92%. Really, really low saturation. Let me just toggle that on and off, just to kind of kill that weird blue lighting that I was getting. And then I overlaid this using a blend screen mode to a star layer, and then just kind of did a little bit of brushing just because the star image originally, if I click on the original one, has stars in the moon. And, you know, there aren't any stars in the moon, at least not that I know of. So I just had to kind of paint those out. So you can see now the moon is just looking like the moon again. There's no stars there. And so let me just turn this on and off again, just so you see that sky replacement. So there it is. So now it is time at this point to start adding in a lot more details to highlight the kind of lighting effect here. I really wanted to make this a little bit warm. So right now it's looking a little bit washed out. I wanted to bring back some of the warmth and add a little bit more mystery in as well. So I used a brush, fog brush, just to kind of add a little bit of fog to our plants because I was losing a little bit of the detail. You can see it's kind of dark here in the shadows. just brought that back, just kind of washing it out just a little bit, lowering that contrast. And then the real magic is in these adjustment layers. You can see there's quite a few here, and I'll just kind of turn them off and walk through them again like I did before. So I added in a little bit of brightness contrast here, and you can see this is just lowering it, brightness just a little bit. And then added in some more vibrance. Again, very subtle with all these. It's hard to kind of even notice the difference. Kind of looking at this at first glance, you can see just where this is really taking the most effect. If you look at these plants here is on the yellows and greens. Just adding in just a little bit of that warmth back because I kind of had taken, I think, a little bit of the saturation away. Added in a color lookup with one of the LUTs that is built into Photoshop. Added in some more hue saturation. Again, incredibly subtle with this. Here's my levels adjustment where probably the largest effect is taking place here, just kind of adding some more contrast into the scene. A couple of brightness contrasts just to bring things back up. And then I did some color balancing because it was getting, again, a little bit too yellow, kind of like a sickly yellow-green if you're looking at it here. So I just kind of brought back some of those darker blue purples in the shadows and highlights, matching it a little bit closely with the sky that we see in the background too. So that was kind of the biggest adjustment there. And if I just kind of toggle the adjustments on and off, you can see what this is doing. We're adding in a lot more contrast. Here, there's really no strong kind of focal element almost because of how washed out everything is. And now with a little bit of that contrast adjustment, you can really see that path that I've created drawing you into this archway. You almost have like kind of a natural vignette with everything. So really great composition. It's really come together quite well from those adjustment layers. And then just taking it a step further, I just went through and added in some final adjustments just to bring back some of the brightness of these street lamps. And there's our scene. So if you like this kind of style of video, let me know in the comments. I'm hoping to do more, videos like this, walking through my scenes step by step, not necessarily showing you how to create them from scratch, but just walking through my workflow, talking about some problems and stumbling blocks I've come through, and also talking a bit about some of the assets and different add-ons that I've used for these scenes. If you wanted to access any of the assets or add-ons that I've talked about in this video, check out the description, and once again, there is that discount code going for another week and a half or so here for True Sky. You can get 15% off if you want to check that one out. And if you want to learn a bit more about how to use that add-on, you can check out my last video here on YouTube. It walks through in greater detail how that is put together. And if you'd like to support me even further, you can check out my Patreon. I've got a lot of really cool project files, world creator textures and displacement maps, and really cool Photoshop or phone backgrounds rather that I've released there for you to access. You also get free mini prints too, every couple months sent to you of some of my latest work, which is always fun, a cool little gift. So check that out in the description if you'd like to support me further. And as always, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for tuning in for this video.